6 years after first contact. John. Sir, it's time to go. Sir. Sir. Dejectedly, John threw the bloody bandages to the side. Pulling a bloody dog tag from the boy's neck, he ran his finger across it to clean it off. Ryan spoke the stamped metal. Just the latest in the list of names he would never forget. Hands slick with blood, Captain John cleaned them on his fatigues before grabbing his rifle. At this point, distinguishing his own blood from that of the dozens of men that had died today was impossible. It had all mixed across his clothes, turning the olive green, brown, and red. Another blast of gunfire rang out from down a nearby tunnel, the concrete walls reverberating and amplifying the sounds of battle. John and his entourage readied their weapons, only Ada, the unarmed intel officer, didn't react. Sir, we have to go. There is no time, she said as the clatter of heavy metal boots down the tunnel announced the victor of the skirmish. Sir, go. We'll hold them as long as we can, said a squatty whose name he had not yet put to memory. The boy was no older than John when he had joined 20 years ago. What's your name? John asked as he was ushered down the tight connecting corridor. Roger, sir, said the squatty, preemptively pulling a pin on his grenade. Beside him, Sergeant Lawrence and Squatty Joannes did the same. The heavy pounding of humerusite boots drew nearer. I won't forget you, shouted John as they neared the next security door, hoping they could still hear him. Before it was done, closing 20 seconds later, he heard a triumvirate of blasts, then silence. As the door sealed, a new distant set of thuds struck the abandoned city above. More drop pods. If the humerusites were curious enough with the energy readings beneath New York to send a third wave, they would doubtless send more. The tunnels of New York had been the only place for this duty after the NASA facilities had been hit. Deep and covered with a few fallen skyscrapers, now miles upon miles of additional tunnels had been built or renovated. The enemy couldn't easily realize the scale of the facilities built beneath the fallen city, but the hope this facility brought was now trampled as the tight halls were filled with the dead and dying, as the acrid smoke of laser blasts and gunpowder filled the rooms. Looking over himself as he and his team walked, John saw he was as well coated in grime and filth as the rest of the facility. It's just up here, said Ada as the team rounded a corner, coming across the last security door. This deep in the facility, the door still had its defenders intact, a dozen men with rifles backed by a pair of heavy guns mounted to the walls. The doors leading here had been more well-armed, but the humerusites were relentless with the last two waves and the defenses withered. As John and company passed the door, an awaiting medic approached him. Shit! How much of that is yours? He asked in a more southern accent. The name tag on his still clean uniform read Austin Baker, and John could tell from the look in his eyes he was just as new as a lot of the men here. Before John could answer, one of the men escorting him collapsed. Just a laser to the shoulder. Help others first, he ordered, and the medical staff obeyed. The launch control room had been converted into the final fallback medical station over the last few hours of fighting, while the cavernous launch bay was fortified and prepared as a final holdout. As many wounded now filled the control room as computers. Looking around, John didn't see many faces preparing the defenses. How many are left? He asked no one in particular. Checking her pad, Ada answered, We have 50 here, 85 total. Anyone not here is holding where they can. As he looked over the ship in the center of the room, he asked the question he had asked too many times today. Names. The AMRES sat like a monolith in the center of the launch chamber. They didn't have time to paint her, leaving her clean white titanium hull looking naked under the floodlights. She was over 150 feet tall and bristling with whatever missile systems could be spared after the loss of so much of the military industry. Too many and not enough time to read the list, replied Ada. She knew the captain well enough to see the cracks forming. From time to time in the last months, he'd begun asking for the names of those who died and memorizing them. In the past week, his need for the names had become obsessive. Ada reviewed her tablet, dismissing a low battery indicator and pulling up the readout. Fuel is at 95%, warheads are loaded. Munitions are loaded, we can launch on your order. Sir. And the crew? What about our liaison? He grunted, forcing himself to forget about the list of dead for more pressing needs. Beside him, a medic was now carefully cutting away his combat fatigue and gluing a bandage on his shoulder. All PROJECT personnel are on board. The convoy has not arrived. They were ambushed 15 miles outside of New York. We do not have a direct U.S. Army liaison, sir. Ada reported dutifully, then holding up her tablet with the required documents ready. Sign here for genocide. With a clean motion, John placed his hand flatly on the tablet, giving his full handprint. Load up! 30 minutes to launch, he ordered. At his word, the command center's ongoing storm of activity began anew as technicians and launch personnel alike began their final checks. Sir, for you, one said, passing him a bag containing a clean pressure suit. They were custom-made for this mission, with special straps and mounts, so one could mount pieces of PROJECT armor or stolen humerite kit on them for added protection. Before he could change into it, he'd need someone to bandage his arm. John looked at his side. The medic was already done. With a sigh of relief, he stripped off his now thoroughly soaked old fatigues and pulled on the pressure suit right there in the corner of the control room. Nearby, Ada did the same, discarding her clean formal suit with the same ease that John had his own bloody rags. The two quickly walked to the nearby entryway, a 50-foot-long umbilical leading directly to the AMRESE bridge. With a simple salute, Ada turned and walked, leaving John alone next to the ship. As per PROJECT ceremony, the captain would be the last to board. It was chilling to know the mission ahead, that if this all went off without a hitch, he would be responsible for killing a planet and all the peoples on it. Looking down the umbilical, the doors to the AMRES called to John like the wailing of the uncommitted to Dante at the gates of hell. With no excuses to wait longer, the captain entered the tight umbilical. No sooner did he step onto the threshold did a set of high-intensity lights activate. He could feel them sterilizing his suit, baking off any pathogens or bacteria that may have been gathered by accident. A thoughtful gesture, if not for the streaks of mixed blood and grime coating his skin beneath. Captain on the bridge, reported Ada as John exited the umbilical. Everyone snapped to attention immediately. Besides the crew whose names John had not yet put to memory, he recognized his bridge staff, Ada, the head intel officer, Jason, the head tactical officer, First Officer Dennis, Second Officer Horatio, Helmsman Conrad, and Oswell, the nuclear ordnance officer. The only empty chair was meant for the U.S. liaison. At ease, said John, and the crew returned to their tasks. Taking his seat and running his own pre-launch procedure on his touchscreen, John began mentally running through his prepared speech again. He had practiced both 100 times over the last month, his pre-launch and his speech. No doubt this one would be going in the history books, so he wanted it to sound nice. After one last practice muttered to himself, John cleared his throat and keyed his comms panel, causing every speaker across the ship to come to life. All hands, this is the captain. A sudden silence fell across the ship as everyone stopped their tasks to listen. The enemy may have bruised us today, but our mission stands and we are set for immediate launch. As they have tasked themselves to put our world to the torch, we too shall end theirs. Strike, true ye vengeful, and let us bring the end to this bitter conflict. Hoorah! Came the reply from across the bridge. Ada's voice in particular caused John's ears to twitch. At her station behind John, Ada began typing as she took over the comms. All hands to launch positions. I repeat, all hands to launch positions. She announced for all to hear before turning off her mic and speaking to the captain. Sir, we've detected another swarm of pods. Should we delay? John knew better than to delay against the humericites. No doubt they had detected the engine spool up and were sending a force to blast their way through the launch bay doors. We launch immediately. Give the order to fire the last of our AA, he commanded. Fire all remaining anti-air, relayed First Officer Dennis. As the launch doors above slid open, the transparent canopy of the bridge gave John a front row seat as dozens of exhaust trails raised into the sky above, all firing on a practiced interval for maximum saturation. Moments later, one after another, many brilliant points began to appear, then disappear, though John could not tell if they were hits or merely saturation explosions. Engines are hot. "We are go on your panel," reported George from her station behind the captain. The smart screen on the captain's chair cleared. A single button appeared on the otherwise blank screen. It was big, red, and everything a man in John's position could dream of. "AMRES launch," declared the captain as he struck the button. In an instant, he and the rest of the crew were pushed back into their seats as the overwhelming power of the engines thrust the AMRES higher and higher into the atmosphere. The inertial dampeners were nothing shy of a miracle, but were still nothing to the power of a full engine launch. Even with his pressure suit, John had to fight to stay conscious. If the blood were not pressing down into his legs, he would probably have begun to bleed through his bandages. As the AMRES rose through the atmosphere, the AA fire died, giving the great ship a moment to pass through the saturation fire like a great whale cresting the ocean before beginning again. Several Humarsite pods threw themselves off course in a desperate bid for survival as they spotted the launching ship and swerved to avoid collision. A few short minutes later, it was over. The roaring of the atmosphere against the hull stopped, and all one could hear was the gentle thrumming of the engine. "Report, what's our position?" asked John, avoiding any looks at the windows. Ada had fallen unconscious in her chair, so George reported instead 150,000 miles above the surface, sir. "Holy shit, we're halfway to the moon!" She almost shouted, almost shouting with excitement, and Nast worked another miracle. Even through the deck plating, John could hear the crew cheering from their respective stations. Before today, PROJECT had no astronauts. Now she had 100. Now Tactical Officer Jason spoke up. "Sir, we are reading the Humarsite blockade beneath us. None have responded to our presence." Seizing the moment of safety, John looked through the window and smiled. A blue marble like none other made his eyes water. After a moment to clear his head, John asked the important question, "How long until we can go to war?" The bridge paused for a few moments as George checked her readout. "Immediately, sir." "Just give the order." "Helm, set course for Waypoint Alpha, maximum warp." Waypoint Alpha had been decided months ago, a quick stop in Proxima Centauri to ensure the enemy were not following and to stress test the ship's systems before the larger leg of the journey. Though her sublight engines may have been many times more powerful than any Humarsite ships, her FTL was slower. The first jump would take 2 weeks, the second 5 years. As much as the crew hated to admit it, they may be arriving after the end of the war. "Aye, sir. Maximum warp on Waypoint Alpha," echoed George. Time stopped for a moment, perhaps literally. John felt his last chance to stop the mission, then watched it fly away as space outside the ship stretched and distorted. Their job finished, the crew stood. "Awakened by emetic smelling salts, Ada stood this way to cryo, sir," she said, indicating with her hand the elevator at the back of the bridge. Her nose was bleeding and she sounded groggy, but otherwise seemed fine.